by the end of this lesson, I think I'm hopefully going to make an argument about why I think bluegrass and folk music. Okay, someone loves bluegrass. That's great. Why bluegrass and folk music, when it comes to improvising and like the fretboard as a guitarist, um, is a really useful place to be, or at least explore. Um, and hopefully, I'll make that argument kind of convincing. Okay, we got at least two bluegrass fans with us today. That's great. Cool. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a little bit of kind of background here, and then we're going to go into some demonstration. I want to give you really an overview of how I think of improvising, how I see the fretboard. I understand that's kind of a lot of what Guillaume's course, which is really awesome, kind of talks about, as well as theory. Um, yeah. Okay, I gotta not look at the chat questions because it's gonna be distracting. And okay, cool. So I'll let Guillaume cover that. So yeah, as Guillaume mentioned, my name is Alex. I grew up in the Hudson Valley area of New York State. I know there's at least one more New Yorker out there. Lived in Durango for about 7 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about my kind of improvising journey, because that's really what this whole thing is about today. So I started off firmly in the jazz world as a guitarist. I took lessons when I was younger. I had this incredible teacher who lived two doors down from me, who was this incredible jazz player. He actually went to the University of Miami, which back, I believe, in like the 70s to 80s really was the best place to be as a jazz guitarist. Pat Metheny taught there. He was like the youngest teacher ever there. He taught when he was 18. And so it kind of spawned this movement of guitarists who were learning at the University of Miami. And I was super lucky to learn from him. His name was Ken. And all throughout high school, really was into jazz, and really kind of thought maybe even lesser of bluegrass. It wasn't even on my radar. I went to college in New York State and took 2 years of kind of jazz school. And so, one thing reflecting back on that path is that I think that a lot of that improvising journey was spent not really thinking about this instrument, um, which as a guitar player is like the most important thing that we have to think about. We have to think about this fretboard, right? But I think a lot of the journey I was on was taught from a different standpoint. Um, I had some incredible professors who taught from the piano standpoint. I took some great classes, took some classes on Charlie Parker, on bebop. Um, but so much of that advice that we were given in school, I think, was oriented or maybe not perfect for guitar players. A lot of what I heard when it came to improvising and learning jazz standards was, learn it in all 12 keys, which is a good thing to do for sure. And also at the same time, I think that there are some things on the guitar, because it's so pattern based, because it's so there's all this symmetry. Where is that the best piece of advice for a guitarist? Well, maybe not. I don't know if that's controversial or not, but so I think the long story short, for a lot of my jazz education, I cut corners, right? A lot of times when it comes to improvising in jazz, I think there's like you have to be responsible. You're expected to be responsible for so much information to start, right? All these extensions, all this harmony, and then you realize, right? Like you can play a single note, this G right here, on so many different spots in the fretboard. It's like, well, not only am I responsible for all this information, now I have to apply that to the fretboard. And that was super overwhelming a lot of times. So I think a lot of my jazz education was me trying to just get by. And I never really dove into the fretboard. After I graduated college, I kind of took a break from music entirely, up until about 5 years ago when I really got into bluegrass. And for me, there is this thing in bluegrass that I think some people are turned off by the perception that it's it's super simple, or they have a lot of misgivings about what bluegrass is. And I just, before we jump into the demonstration, without totally boring you with all this conversation, I want to just jump into bluegrass and why I think it's so poignant of a genre, and folk music as a genre, to explore improvising like with a fretboard like this. Um, a lot of what it comes down to is there's this beauty in the simplicity, right? And sometimes I think when we think of simplicity in music, there's this value judgment of that means easy or dumbed down or watered down. Um, to me, it's not that at all. It's actually, like, I think of simplicity as like essentialized. So for me, bluegrass has that beauty, this kind of simple, essentialized beauty of harmony. Also, just to take you a little bit through the history of bluegrass without totally going on a diatribe here. I don't know if most people know this. I think there's a misconception that bluegrass is this ancient music that originated way back. Bluegrass started in late 1940s, early 1950s. Truly, fiddle music in the United States has origins, pre-USA, for sure, and is a lot more ancient. But bluegrass as a genre really only truly started in late 1940s. So it started after jazz. The founder of, or whoever gets the person who gets credited for bluegrass, Bill Monroe, he basically took fiddle music, square dance music, and then blended it with the blues, for the most part, and then kind of put like a Western, he put a cowboy hat on, called it his own. He just kind of rearranged things that already existed. And then once Earl Scruggs, the banjo player, joined his band playing three-finger banjo, he literally just adapted ragtime piano to banjo, with a three-finger banjo style to syncopate. So it's the combination of that stuff. And I think that because of the history of bluegrass, the history of, America, as it were, there are a lot of misgivings about, or misunderstandings, I think, about what bluegrass is. I think it's directly tied to jazz. And so that kind of drew me in. A lot of the bluegrass that I listened to, maybe the second wave of bluegrass in the 1970s, if you listen to somebody like Tony Rice, is totally influenced by jazz. You listen to interviews with Tony Rice, who's a guitar player, a bluegrass guitar player, from the 70s onwards, and he was listening to Bill Evans, and Thelonious Monk and Oscar Peterson. It's so connected, and so there's this inherent tie to jazz and to the idea of like improvising that so rings true in bluegrass. So that, I just want to dispel, maybe hopefully convince you that bluegrass is a little bit hipper than you might think otherwise. It's kind of just disguised hipness, I think. Also, beyond that, I just think that like folk music, like the folk tradition, when it comes to improvising, is so important. I think reflecting on some of the jazz education I had, in college and before college, I felt like I was expected to know all of this intense harmonic information and these chord changes and these substitutions, and I hadn't even really truly understood how to get from a 1 to a 4 chord or a 1 to a 5 chord and back. Right? And to me, it's like it's placing the chicken before the egg, or is that how that works, right? Or the egg before the chicken? Chicken before the egg. I think that like folk music, when you're thinking about improvising, is so powerful for me, because it is really focused on a 1 chord, a 4 chord, a 1 chord to a 5 chord back to a 1, which I think that's like 80% of Western music right there, is that relationship, is those cadences, right? Is just a 1 chord to a 4 or a 1 chord to a 5. Like, it's just that tension and release is like the essentialized information, in my opinion, of like 80% of Western music. All that jazz stuff that I was trying to learn is just derivative of that, or maybe there's a key change, or maybe there's substitutions. So I think that part of the reason why I've been so drawn to bluegrass and folk music when it comes to improvising is really because of that. Is it's allowed me to just sit in like the simplicity, the essentialized kind of like tensions and releases of Western music. Okay, that diatribe aside, I hope everyone's still with me and generally agrees with me. Maybe there's some folks who disagree with me. That's okay. Um, what I want to talk about here is really the thrust of this is going to be the fretboard as it relates to. Okay, some folks are with me. That's awesome. The fretboard as it relates to folk music and why I think if you aren't hip to it already, you can use like really old folk tunes to help you map the fretboard in so many ways. There's so many exercises. So I'm going to start to throw a bunch of stuff at you. And we'll see if maybe, if just one thing sticks with you today, then I feel like I've done a good job. So I want to talk about generally like how I look at improvising coming from my jazz background in the bluegrass and kind of like folk music world. So I would break down my approach when I'm thinking about improvising into like maybe 4 or 5 distinct categories. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, but when I'm actually in the moment, I'm not really thinking about any one of these things. Hopefully, the practice session has allowed me to integrate all this stuff so it's fluid and I can flow. But those distinct things are, first and foremost, melody, okay? Melody all across the neck. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And the good thing about a lot of these folk tunes is the melodies are just based off of your basic stacked chords, your tones, your root, third, and fifth going through the chord progression. So melody is number one to me. Thinking of improvising over a folk tune in a full fretboard kind of like one tonal center way, right? So this is my second way of thinking about improvising, right? So a lot of these folk tunes, the beauty is they're in one major key. They don't switch keys. They're already in your ear. And so mapping a major scale over the entire fretboard, super crucial for me. On top of that, stacking caged chords or triads or the full chords, I guess, over that major fretboard. Those are kind of subcategories of that tonal center thinking. So we have melody, tonal center. The next one would be making the changes, right? That's kind of like a jazz term I was always told about, which is outlining the chords, the chord progression with root, third, fifth of that chord as it comes along, right? So a listener can listen to a song and hear from your improvising the chord changes as they pass by. And then 2 other things. One would just be like this overall concept of tension and release, right? Like that's where a lot of the jazz stuff comes into play. How can I create tension in an unexpected way? And then the very last one, which might be a little bit closer to the top, is the language that I'm of the particular idiom I'm playing in, right? Is it bebop? Is it bluegrass, right? So yeah, we're talking about licks. I think licks sometimes get a bad rap because it's perceived as just copying. But I think for a tradition like bluegrass or jazz or many others, the language is really important. Not that you're gonna just try to sound exactly like one particular. I'm just gonna sound like Pat Martino and that's it, right? Like I guess you could do that, but the language is important because it's your frame of reference, it's the context of how you're gonna phrase and what you're gonna reference. So in summary, when I'm thinking like a framework for me of improvising is those 5 things. So we've got melody, we've got thinking of like a tonal center, mapping a tonal center over the fretboard. We've got then making the changes, right? Outline the chords, that's 3. We've got tension and release, that's another just kind of like overarching concept. And then also like what is the language that you're trying to speak? So with that, does that kind of make sense for everybody? I'm going to start to get into some details about how I actually apply those things over a tune, hopefully that's familiar to you. Okay, so I'm going to do the best I can here. My brain's in a couple places at once, and I'm going to try to go inward to the guitar here. So I want to use an example of like a folk tune, just to illustrate the point of what I mean when I say like a folk tune is a good place to explore these concepts. So the folk tune I want to choose is "Oh When the Saints Go Marching In." Right? It could be considered a jazz tune, but I'm considering jazz as like within the folk tradition, right? These are like common songs that many people know. And I think they get skipped because we associate them with, oh, that's for when you are first starting to play the guitar. I'm saying no, I think those are the most essential tunes to learn for mapping the fretboard. So, "Oh When the Saints Go Marching In." So let's take like those five or so elements, and I'll show you some exercises or ways that we can kind of like really dive into the fretboard and explore this song, right? So with bluegrass and with a lot of folk, you know, and this is the one caveat, is we're typically, our home base is typically down here, right? Is typically, so our one chord for this song will either be in terms of caged shapes, right? One of those caged shapes. Right, and that's home base. So for bluegrass, I'm going to really just talk about three of those shapes, G, C, and D, even though E and A are equally as important, but those are the shapes I'm typically playing out of. Really, we're just going to focus in on a G shape as your one chord here. So I do kind of want to start with melody, but before we even get to melody, I just want to actually, it would be more important to look at a couple other things first. I think we want to start this a little bit backwards. Does everybody know in general the melody to "Oh When the Saints Go Marching In," right? Oh, when the saints go marching in, right, 5 chord. Something like that, right? I'm on the spot here, and I'm kind of flubbing it. But so melody is super important, but let's work this backwards. First, sorry, dog's barking. First, I want to talk about major scale all across the neck. So the first way I would start to map is major scale positions before we even get to improvising, right? So what I want to do here is I'm going to throw on a drone in the background for us. Okay, hopefully you can kind of hear that. Maybe I'll turn up a little bit louder. Okay, so we've just got like in general, some root fifth going on in the background. So first thing I would do, maybe this is familiar to you all, but I would take all of the G major positions, I would break them up into 5 positions, and I would start to work those up and down the neck, right? So we've got, start with open, right? Right, okay, you've got open, you've got first, right? And I'm just going to kind of run through these because we've got a time constraint. Right? Ah! Right, so I use these 5 positions, which are generally correlated to like your major pentatonic positions. Maybe this stuff is somewhat familiar. Maybe Guillaume, you're going over some of this stuff with folks. Now, one of the greatest benefits to being a guitar player and having this fretboard is that we have shapes. We have these mnemonic devices to be able to play tones, right, and to memorize them. And that's a great asset to have when it comes to being responsible for the whole fretboard and memorizing G major across the entire fretboard. It's a great asset, but also it's a double-edged sword, because how many guitar players feel like they're stuck in one particular box or one particular position, right? So not only is our goal in mapping major across the fretboard to memorize major across the fretboard with the boxes, but also to destroy the edges between positions. So what I like to do is I like to put a drone on, and I like to create an exercise where, okay, like I'm going to start to blur the lines between open position and first position. And the way I'm going to do that, again, is I have this drone on in the background, and this is supposed to be like meditative fun, right? So I'm just going to start to improvise using those two, open and first, and just start to blur those lines. Right? Switching my hand position and starting to work out where are the spots where I can actually make that change. Just like little phrases, nothing like mind-blowing, right? Just really letting your brain adjust. And you're gonna find things that work particularly well for you, and you're gonna find things that don't work, that are clumsy, right? So that's between open and first. Then I might do that, right? So there's some slides that'll help you get between. Some are not gonna be that great, right? So really starting, the idea here is to break the boundary between different positions. Also, you don't have to do adjacent positions. You can test yourself to jump from non-adjacent positions, right? And see how that, right? See how that would work. And this is just starting to, like, although we're creating categories, we're also breaking the categories. So we're responsible for both things at the same time. Okay. Really kind of, that's just a crash course on how I start to map stuff. If you have questions, you can throw them in the chat. I'll try to answer as we go, and then also at the end here. Okay, next step, before we even get to the melody, also for me would be map those caged positions over that major scale. And this stuff is going to start to like kind of compound, and the knowledge is going to be just multiplied, really. So, right, like this is pretty simple stuff in a way, right? Just these open. So we've got G, right? The cool thing about caged, if you don't know already, is as you spell caged, it spells it up the neck. So we've got C-A-G-E or C-A-G-E, right? We're in the key of G. We're doing the cage shapes. This is always kind of funny to describe. Okay, so we've got our E shape for G major, D shape, right, with this guy. I like to go like that voicing, C-A-G-E-D. So then we're back to C. Right, that's like a C shape. We've got A, C-A-G, and then we've got that really unwieldy G shape, which is a lot easier to play open. So next, I would just start to use the same kind of exercises to now incorporate all that information and to test myself to, again, break the boundaries, right? Because the thing about this cage stuff is like that C, this little triad at the top for this C shape, a G chord, that's contained in the D also, right? It's the same triad. So there are boundaries and there are no boundaries. It's both things at the same time. The more you can start to break down those walls for yourself, the more flowy you'll be able to be with this stuff. So I would do the same type of exercise. For me, I don't know about for you, but for me, this exercise type of stuff is like my favorite practice. It's the type of practice that doesn't feel like practice because it's really, for me, this is like so meditative, right? It's like it feels good to do because there are no expectations for me. I'm just creating music in the moment, and I'm just creating little simple ideas and trying to feel just, there's no anxiety about it. It's just, so yeah, it's like a meditation for me. So I encourage you to look at least this practice like that as well, as like restorative in this funny way. Cool. So we've looked at the fretboard, just a major scale. We've looked at those cage shapes. Now would be the time to start to engage this melody. And so what I would do, now that we have those shapes and we have a little bit of this fretboard mapped, start to figure out "Oh When the Saints," that melody, in as many places as you possibly can. Really, in all the places you can is the best way to do it. And you can also compound some knowledge here, because this is how I like to do something like this, right? Okay, "Oh When the Saints." Let's just think of the first phrase, right? "Oh when the saints." So this is going to be useful also for step Z, which is going to be transposing. So, "Oh When the Saints," how do we, let's describe this melody. What does this do in terms of intervals? Okay, it starts on the root, third, 4, 5. That's what the melody does forever. It's never going to change. Whatever key you're in, it goes root, third, 4th, 5. So now we can, based on just a little bit of information about what these cage shapes are, I know that's a root, okay, right? So we can start to map this stuff out, right? So not only are we getting familiar with cage shapes, but because we know that melody, again, is root, third, 4, 5, now it's okay, if somebody says go, if I tell myself, go to a C shape, play the root, oh, I know that from "Oh When the Saints," right? And then if you want to do a little motif that gets up to the 5, oh shoot, now forever, this is never going to change, the 5th is always right there out of this C shape. It's always there. It's never going to go anywhere else. So the point is mapping, right? I would map this melody all across the fretboard. Super meditative stuff. There's no stress on this. There's no pressure to do it really fast. It's just stuff you do when you're bored. So now not only do we have this map, we have caged, we have this melody in a couple different places at least. This is all with the goal of improvising, right? Of being in the moment and improvising it. Okay, next, chord changes. I'm going to turn this drone off really quick. So, chord changes. All right, make the changes. How do we make the changes? What do I mean by that? I'm just going to give you a brief demonstration. So, to make the changes when we're improvising, right, you want to map out, you need to know what the chord changes are. So what are the chord changes? This is somewhat in tune. So what are the chord changes to "Oh When the Saints Go Marching In"? As simple as possible. No substitutions, no 2 5s to get to the next key, nothing like that, right? No upper extensions. So it goes 1, I'm just going to use numbers, and hopefully people are familiar with numbers. We're just going to use 1, 4, and 5. So 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 to the 5. Oh, 1, 1, 1 to the 4. Oh, 1 to the 5 to the 1. Okay, as simple as possible. Okay. So from that, then, out of time, don't worry about the metronome yet, making the changes. This is when a lot of this other caged stuff is going to become useful. So this is maybe a step, maybe 3 steps next. But basically what I would want to do is, within kind of every zone of the fretboard, map out how I can make the changes by just outlining the chords, the roots, the thirds, the fifths, right? So I'll kind of do this out of time for you as an example. Near, open to first. Right? Kind of you don't have to worry about being super musical. I did throw in some kind of licks. I wasn't strictly just arpeggiating, right? So that would be something really useful to do. And this is something this doesn't end. This is just, you never, to me, truly arrive on all of the permutations and different ways you can arrive, even just between a 1 chord, a 4 chord, and a 5 chord. That's my opinion. I think there's unlimited ways to do this. So I would do this down here. I do this near the E shape, right? This is a weird one. Near the D shape. Okay, like that moment right there is the greatest moment of, oh shoot, where did that shape just go? And then you place it, and there's your C, right? So you can see how there's just unlimited stuff that you can do there. This presentation is not meant to cause anxiety about, oh my God, there's so much stuff I don't know, at all, right? This stuff is all totally attainable to you if you don't have this like under your fingers yet. And again, the fact that it's never the work on this is never like done means that nobody, no matter how much of a maestro they are at guitar, no one has ever really landed at every single way to outline these chords, which makes it better for you, because that means there's no anxiety and you need to just erase the idea that you need to arrive there right now, because no one's arrived ever. That's just my kind of philosophy on it. So I don't want this to give you any anxiety about, oh my God, I have all this work to do. Just a little bit of motivation to do some of this work. Cool. So that would be a way of starting to train yourself to make the changes. One note I just want to make here is, sure, you can do that with a backing track, but I would recommend you don't do it with a backing track, because the point of this is being able to hear those changes, right? And you can use the shapes to bolster your ear, right? Like I know a D shape is going to be here. Maybe I don't have it in my ear yet, but I know just based on the way the fretboard works, that's where it is, right? And so a lot of this is, you can also get some ear training if you don't use a backing track. Do it out of time. Don't even worry about introducing a metronome yet. Even just singing some of this stuff. If you don't even have a guitar, you're driving to work or whatever, if you just sing those triads and try to create some creative ways of navigating just 1 to 4, 1 to 5, back to 1, incredible. Like that's going to start to translate into the fretboard, whether you have it mapped or not, because you're just going to hear it. Okay, trying to get to my my last couple points here without totally putting you all to sleep. Is this somewhat interesting? We're doing okay? Okay. All right, I got a thumbs up from Guillaume, so that means I'm doing okay. Cool. So what have we done so far? We've done melody, right? We're trying to get the melody all across the neck. We've mapped G major. We've mapped some of those caged chords to help us. We've worked with making the changes. Two other things I just kind of want to briefly talk about. When it comes to some of these like hip ways of maybe making these folk songs a little bit less simplistic or trite feeling, right? I tend to think of that stuff not as like necessarily, an augmented or calling out specific tones necessarily. I just think of that stuff as like tension and release. That's the effect we're having. So whether you're using a whole tone scale on the 5 chord to go back to 1, whether you're like diminished, whether you're like, right? All that stuff just gets lumped into tension and release for me, at least in this exercise. And where does tension go? Tension goes on the 5 chord for sure. You can create tension to go to a 5 chord, and you can create tension to go to a 4 chord. So tension can be placed when you're trying to arrive in a different place, right? So with that information, right, maybe the easiest way to create some tension is just to start to introduce some dominant 7th chords, right? So as a vehicle to bring you to a 5 chord, as a vehicle to bring you back to a 1 chord, or even as a vehicle to bring you to a 4 chord. I'm not going to say too much more about that, because I think I'm already throwing enough information at you. I would just say when I'm improvising, I'm not necessarily... I lump all tension into the same pool or into the same like spice jar. It's like all different spices. It's the tension jar. I might take this one. It might taste a little bit different from that one, but it's all, I think of it all as one just for ease. Okay. And then the last piece here, again, we have 5 things here. The last one is language. That one is just gonna take some time, and has taken some time for me. And that one comes really from like transcribing solos, listening to other like players who you like, pulling out the one thing that you love about that solo, and then practicing it, to integrate it into your own playing. I think the language thing is super important. I was lucky enough in school to take a course that was entirely focused on Charlie Parker and his like heads and solos. And what we would do, we would not even pick up our instruments. Like this was a Charlie Parker class. We barely touched our instruments. We would have the sheet music, the omnibook. I don't really read music that well. I'm a guitar player. I don't know how many of you read sheet music too well. Hopefully very well, Guillaume. No, but we'd read the transcriptions of the Charlie Parker. If you don't know Charlie Parker, bebop saxophonist, like the bebop saxophonist, defined the genre. And we would just note for note, the instructor would just play on the piano the next note, and we'd memorize the language and we'd sing it back. And I have all that stuff. I've been indoctrinated with it, and it's worked its way out over the last 10 years so that it's kind of more fluid. But that type of stuff, you just have to consume it. You just have to eat it. You have to learn it and just slowly integrate it into your playing. And the language piece is super important because we're talking about very specific idioms sometimes. And that's up to you. That's like your call about how much of that you wanna eat. Okay, geez. So that's a lot of stuff there. That's kind of my blueprint. That's how I think of improvising. I think, again, my thesis here is that complex harmony in jazz, in modern music, is beautiful. It's incredible. It's why a lot of us are drawn to that particular type of music in the first place, and we want to sound like that. I think that really, for me personally, I took that leap too early, and I have taken a step backward to go forward in my playing, and literally just focused on 1 to 4 to 5 with these folk tunes, and I've made it fun. And I will tell you that my jazz playing, even though I'm not necessarily practicing jazz, right? I'm playing folk tunes, I'm playing bluegrass. My jazz playing has improved like crazy, literally, just because I'm able to hear, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, back to 1. Like that is, if you just have that, you can get through so much music. Gosh, that was a lot of talking.
It was awesome, Alex.
Yeah, what do we think about that? I can try to give you a demonstration of how I might improvise. I can
One
just answer some
request.
questions. Yeah, what's that?
Give us a demo. Give us like a
Okay.
3 minute demo. Show us what you got, and let these guys, you know.
Okay, cool. Let's see how I do with this. I'll put myself on the spot here. I'll try to.
You can use your metronome too. Like that's what kind of your go-to I know in your videos, but go for
No, I'm
it.
gonna skip that. We'll see if I can keep it in somewhat good time. I've had a little bit of coffee, if you can't tell, so I might rush a little bit. kind of got into it there, and I'm playing bluegrass really at the end of the day. So I hope that doesn't offend anybody.
No, you do. That was awesome, man. That was awesome. Yeah, this is a so here again. Here, I'll do a little segue. Just kind of try to contextualize everything that's been said here for everyone, and then you guys will have open questions. You can ask any questions you want to start preparing them. The first thing I kind of want to say is, in many sense, Alex and I talked a tiny bit. I just told him to have like some sort of ideas of how he thinks about improvisation. And I mean, if I had like kind of connived with someone to like make it seem like their way of thinking is completely in line with what I teach, I probably would have come up with something like this. So, and this was not, rehearsed at all. But what those of you that have already gone through the program or that are in the areas of the program where you've already probably seen all these notions, the cage system when it relates to pentonics, the scales, the blues scales, etc., you start pretty much realizing that this is extremely similar to some of the things that we see in the course. And there's a reason for that, is that people that crack the code to knowing how to improvise the guitar typically have to use those tools, whether they realize it or not, to find their way on the fretboard. Because if you want to improvise correctly, you need an understanding of the chord tones that you're using. You need an understanding that notes on the guitar repeat just with different shapes and different areas, and that all those chord tones are slightly in different spots when you get into all these different shapes. And then around this kind of like envelope and framework of the cage system, you can find anything else. You can find your pentatonic scales. You can find your major scale. You can find your modes by moving some of those intervals. And literally every single one of the keywords that we keep talking about in the program that I emphasize were stated in Alex's presentation over here. I don't know if you realize. One of the things, I took all the notes over here, but the fact that there is beauty in constraints, because when everything is open, it's easy to get overwhelmed. To constrain yourself either with, harmonically in this case, with just a simple chord progression, with just one, like I told you, just one area of the fretboard rather than going everywhere. Try to just learn to play everything in that one shape, and see what you can come up with. Or on the other side, kind of trying to move up and down. That was all stated. There is the important, as I said over here, he stated that when you're in the moment, you don't think. There's this misconception that people that know theory are always in their head thinking, doing math about what they're doing. It's like, no, when you're playing, you don't think. You practice so that you can come up with cool things without having to think. And Alex said that clearly. The practice time is when you think, and you should think when you practice so that you don't have to when you're playing, where a lot of people noodle when they're practicing with no framework, no intention of gaining more clarity of the fretboard or things like this. And then they wonder why, when they're in real life situations, nothing has moved. That's kind of the thing here. Then the drone note. Who has used the drone note here in this course? I mean, that's pretty much, of course, the meditative aspect of the drone note, the cage system. For those of you that went enough in the program, like Pauline here or Tom, with cadences and chord progressions, what is the main active mechanism of any tonal music? It's tension release. You could call whatever you want for the tension, whatever you want for the release, but that is the core of harmony remaining interesting, is that kind of and then there's tension release harmonically, but also in this case, since the harmony is very simple, you can bring the tension melodically, you can bring the tension rhythmically by doing all sorts of weird things and then resolving on some simpler lines, like what Alex did here, coming back to the melody. You have the importance of licks. That's what I call stylistic, right? Alex called it idioms or lingual, and or language. That's pretty much equivalent, right? Stylistic means that a major 7 is the same for everyone. People say, I don't play jazz. I'm like, I don't care. Major 7 is major 7. And it's not just used in jazz. But what is true is that if you want to become good at blues, for example, you got to listen to some blues and you have to pick up some licks. And then people say, I don't like playing other people's music. I want to play my music. It's like, yeah, but it's not going to work like this. If you want to sound like a blues musician, I'm not saying transcribe all the blues tunes. I'm saying take like 10 licks or 10 little things that you like and learn them to where they're perfect, to where the bend is exactly where the person is playing the bend and things like this, so that you can get a feel for what it's like to play in that style. Nuances that are incredibly complex, and no teacher can teach you exactly how to do it. You have to use your judgment to really, fine tune this until you feel like you've really made it perfect. And I'll let Alex kind of jump back or talk about these things too. Intervals were stated, using simple interval patterns rather than going all over the place. Well, that's the 1, that's the 3, that's the 1, that's the 5, and how these intervals are in each shape and how they're consistent all over the fretboard. Once you know the interval shape and you've kind of internalized it through a practice like this with a drone note, then all of a sudden you've got it in under your fingers, and before you know it, you're using it in your solos without even realizing it. Singing what you're playing, also really true. You never arrive, right? So for everyone that's like, I feel like I've got so much to do. Yes, you do. And we all do. And we're displacing the things that we do, but we still have tons to do, which was a great moment here with the oh shoot moment when you get lost. I tell everyone here, it's okay to get lost. You should try to get lost on your fretboard, because every time you get lost, but rather than going back to your safe zone, you try to think, where is the thing in that zone, right? That's the important thing that Alex did here. Rather than going back to, oh no, he was like, wait a minute, where is it? Oh, here it is. And then you find it. And that moment where you do this, you've gained some points in the game, like you've made some progress. And then also lastly, practice without the instruments, right? That was kind of referred to in some of the things that you did, which is also just as valuable at practice with your instrument. So anyways, I think it was an incredible presentation. There was a lot of really cool aspects of it. And yeah, it's just a great demonstration of what it feels like to be in someone's mind when they're improvising. Okay. So I would like for everyone here to ask me if, well, first of all, Alex, do you have any final words bouncing back from what I said here? And while you're replying, everyone put their questions in the description over here. I've got Aaron that has one, but let's see if anyone else has questions. Please ask questions.
Yeah, I would just say, yeah, the final thought is, I like just back to what you were saying before, and I kind of touched on it a little bit, but the idea that, yeah, that work is, you never arrive. Like, if you can reframe that, if one can reframe that from this anxiety point to like what makes it fun, that's gonna keep you playing forever, and that's the goal. Is like, to me, that is the best part of music. The fact that I'm actually never gonna get it. Like, I'm never fully gonna get there. Like, that is so addicting, that idea. And it's a beautiful one, I think, and it's one that I hope can motivate you to keep doing it rather than the opposite of turning it into a negative. It's the most positive thing about music, is that it's endless, really, in a beautiful way. So that's my soapbox philosophical ending there, but I'm happy to answer other questions as well.
100%. It was well stated here, and it's true. And a lot of people here, I know I hear those comments in the course. It's like, I still feel like that. I still feel like this and this, and it's like, yeah, I still feel like that too.
Yeah, that's okay. I saw this video of one of my favorite guitar players, Bill Frisell, playing with this jazz player, Matt Muniseri. Maybe folks know him. He plays like an archtop like this. But it's this video for Fretboard Journal. And after this, they improvise and they play a tune. And Bill Frisell, who's like very kind of like soft spoken and kind of funny, but like he plays this incredible thing. And afterwards, he's just like, God, after 50 years, 60 years of playing guitar, like, I still just never feel ready. Like it's already gone. It slipped away. And I was like, man, if he thinks that, then what's the big deal? Like for me feeling like I'm not there yet. Like if my maestro thinks that, then it's like that's got to be the fun of it. So anyway, not to beat a dead horse.
One question that by Aaron, Alex, that's he
Shoot.
said, I love this, first of all, and then he said, can you show us how to introduce 7 chords to those cadences?
Yeah, I mean, basically to me, like the dominant seventh chord, at least, I think that's kind of what you're referring to. I was alluding to that creates like that half step motion from whatever chord you're dominant seventhing to the 5 of that chord potentially, right? So at least that's how I think of it. So like and the Saints, so you could use it in a couple different places, right? Well, the 5 chord is the D, right? So you could definitely use a dominant 7th there. When the Saints go marching in, when the Saints go marching in, right, to get you back to the 1. Also, you can use that dominant 7th to get you to the 4 chord, right? Because if you were theoretically, and again, I'm not thinking this in the moment, I just can hear it, and I'm sure you all will be able to hear this, right? If you're going to a C, well, what's the 5 chord of a C? Pretty sure that's a G, right? Take a step back, right? If we're playing this in G, and that last, there's that cadence, oh, I want to be in that number, right? To the C. Okay, well, G7 leads us, is almost acting, in theory, as the 5 chord to a C. That's one way to think of it, or you could just say, that leads into the next one. That's creating a little bit of tension rather than just go, right? We could also put a 7th chord there, right? So you can just create some tension, and then basically like half step motion to when you're improvising to get to those 7ths is a sure way to make it work. So like what do I mean by that? Like let's just take that example of G. Oh, I want to be in that number, right? So I could go, right? So G walking down to that F, which is the dominant 7th. That's a sure way to outline that chord. And there's this relationship between like 7ths and 3rds. The dominant 7th of this leads to a half step, the E of the next chord, which is the 3rd of the C. Right? I'm trying not to be too confusing here and add too much theory, but
that's amazing.
There's voice leading basically that goes on with that.
For those of you, like, if you want a written explanation here, right? So if you look at the chord progression over here, can everyone see my screen? Yes? Cool. Alex, can you see it too?
Yeah, it looks good.
So I guess it's D, right? Something like that. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it goes to D to C or something, or straight to C here, Alex?
Yeah, the form is a little bit wonky.
1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 or something like that. I guess it doesn't even matter here because we're going to look harmonically. It's really cool. That's what's cool about these progressions here that essentially leverage the 1, 4, 5 in a way that's not like a standard blues, but it still could totally, be a blues because you have that 1, 4, 5, especially that vamp on the G chord here. So you probably do that. I heard you do that in a lot of your solo here, Alex. You can leverage over that G. You can go G major or G major blues scale even, no problem, right? Add that little blue note. You can even throw in some G, probably minor blues scale because it has that kind of dirty, like bluesy tension over here. Totally. And then what Alex was saying here, which is totally true, is that so the D is the 5 chords. So you can always, even tonally, you're not modulating when you do this, add a 7. That will resolve onto G because that's the 5. And then on this G, you could think of this as the 5 of C, which is the 4 chord over here, which then resolves here. So now you have another tension release over here. Something I hear a lot of bluegrass musicians too do here is going back to G is go over the C minor chord, because that creates an extra tension going back to the, do you use that one, Alex, too, on that C
Heck
here?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, all the time.
What
Yeah,
would that
it's
sound
a
like?
classic.
If you can.
Or
Melodic.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then you're back here. So those would be the opportunities for 7. And as far as I understand it, and then the thing is, for those of you that you haven't seen this already, but you will in phase 3 when we go through harmony, is that you any one of those, like you said, tension is tension. And so once you've got a 7 chord, well, you could play a 2-5, or you can play a 5 of that 5, and you can kind of create more chains of tension like this, or substitutions, or things like this. And then 5 chords come with a whole bank of scales that you can play over them because of those alterations you're talking about within the jazz world. And all of a sudden, you're opening like so many doors. And from that simple 1-4-5, you can make something that sounds like jazz fusion with the same the same chord progression. Does that make sense for everyone? And Alex, is that in line with how you would think here?
Absolutely. And the key is that it is inherently as complex as it gets. It's really just simple stuff though. It like that's how I keep it in order to actually be effective with my improvising. Is like it is just at the simplest way I can explain it to myself, or at least understand it, is the way it needs to be. And that's why like just saying tension and release is so much superior, so further superior to like being very specific or being very like unnecessarily theoretical. At least for me when I'm improvising. Not to say that that stuff isn't important, but like that's in the real world for me. It's like even when it starts to sound complex, it's like really just simple stuff.
Absolutely. So we have another question by Aaron said, perfect. So I guess we got the question answered. We've got David said, this is often. Thanks a ton. Can you say more about outlining the chord changes? And specifically, I wonder how you do that without just emphasizing the root of each chord as it goes, especially since chords share some notes. For example, 1 and 4, they both share the 1. So how do you make clear that you're outlining, the 4 chord? And then is it the idea to just emphasize the notes that are different, or do you even think about this basically?
Yeah, that's a great question. David, you have a good point, right? Like a lot of all the notes that are contained within these diatonic chords, or just the 1, the 4, and the 5 in a key, they're all contained within the major scale in general, right? So how do you make it identifiable? To me, it's just about playing. It's the relationship of those notes together, right? So what I mean is like, right, that's obviously your 1. If I'm going to outline a 4 chord, I'm going to outline the root, the 3rd, and the 5th in some combination of that. The root, the 3rd, the 5th of the 4 chord of that C, right? If we're in G, right? Those notes, those 3 notes are in that C, that E, and that G are in the key of G. But this is like very clearly a C chord, right? Like I hear C. You can't not hear C. So to me, it's about using the root, 3rd, 5th of each of the passing chords in like together. Does that kind of make sense, right? Like these are all notes in G major, but that's obviously a D triad right there. So it's about using some type of combination. So I can do like a little demonstration, just like literally limit myself out of time. So sorry, that's the wrong. All those notes are all in G major, but you could kind of hear, hopefully, those chords as they pass by because I'm just using root third and fifth, stacking them. Am I saying that in the best way, Guillaume? What do you think?
Yeah. I think you all your points are perfectly in line with the question over here. It's the conversation that I like to point out here, David, to kind of jump from this is, to me, there is always kind of like an overarching kind of key. The drone note, G. We're in G major with the notes of G major, pentatonic, if that's your home base, with the full major scale, right? That's the overarching context. You can play that scale all over the fretboard. Your risks of hitting wrong notes are fairly low. But then you have the local contexts, and the local contexts are each bar becomes its own little context that you could zoom in on. And this is where you have an opportunity to play arpeggios. But if you listen to so you can think two extremes here. On one extreme, you're just playing the scale and you're never thinking of the chords. So you just play the scale all over the fretboard. And that works, for example, if you're playing fast runs or things like this and you're not trying to be specifically melodic, you can just go up and down your scale. And it is a good exercise to just use the scale, the framework as the framework, and try to stop on notes that seem melodic to you. The other extreme of this would be trying to play every single arpeggio of every chord that's on the thing, where you just outline everything. And people obsess with this. Guitarists come to the chords, they're like, I want to play all the chord tones of every chord. I was like, well, good luck. Let's start with pentatonic scales. Can you play that? It's like, because that's very difficult. And even though it's the most in you'll ever sound because you're just literally playing the chord progression, in reality, to execute this at speeds that they go to on Bluegrass sometimes, you got to really have your shit together if you want to be able to outline every single chord. Sometimes the chords go by so fast that in order to just play the whole chord, you have to be playing super fast because the chords change really quickly. So you don't really have time to outline every one of those chords. So the best thing to do is to start with a simple context that you understand, like a scale or a pentatonic, and then little by little, try to start adding little arpeggios into those progressions. Try to start hitting the D arpeggio, things like this, and going really slow without a metronome, even like Alex said, to just try to figure out some licks of what it feels like in this shape to go from the 1 to the 5, so that when you're doing it in context, you don't need to think about it and it just kind of flows under your fingers, because again, you don't have time to think about this when you're looking at the chord progression. You got to go. So it's sometimes people think about it too much under a microscope. Like, how is the 4 going to sound if it's in this chord rather than, it's like you're going a little too far here. Like, think of the general concepts, practice slowly, and use your ear to figure out what works best for you based on where you're at now, and then on the next steps that you want to take to make your solos a little bit better. Does that make sense? And does that sound about right, Alex?
Totally. And also, just, I mean, it can turn into a complex conversation because, again, at the end of the day, we're talking about like, how do you improvise? And that's like a non-verbal thing, and we're trying to put words to it. But like, also, I think just weighing also the idea of like, what is practice? What is like music, right? Are those two things the same? Are those two different, right? Like, if I was going to improvise and like, this is my solo over When the Saints Go Marching In. Like, that sounds like an exercise, right? So as you do these exercises, you'll realize what sounds like an exercise to you, what doesn't sound like an exercise, and hopefully doing this enough, you'll be able to make choices about when you want to outline the chord, when you don't, when you want to play something weird, And then maybe if you play something weird, then you might be like, oh shoot, let me outline the chords to let the listener know where we are, right? So like this stuff also, just with the conversation, it's like it can get exercisey if you just treat it as an exercise. I just want to put that in there as well. Not to make it
Absolutely.
too complicated.
That's awesome. Robert has a question too. This is fantastic. Figuring out the melodies all over the fretboard is a great place to start, almost a duh. Will this technique also work when getting to songs with complex chords? Yes, I'll just preemptively answer. I am assuming that once I begin mastering the fretboard, I will be on the way to figuring out the chords, harmony, language of the music. He says, Lyle Lovett with my long-term goal. His chords seem insurmountable. Having fun along the way would be a huge plus. Your input, please. So go ahead, Alex.
I mean, I read all that and I also just want to answer yes. Like this is a way that you can digest any song. The reason I posed it as just like songs that are just 1 4 5 is because to me that is the most intrinsic, like essentialized pieces of Western harmony that a listener can relate to. But yeah, no matter what the chord is, I mean, there are some maybe inversions or some other mapping. It just needs to get mapped. And to be honest with you, not to totally throw away any of the baby with the bathwater here when it comes to music, but like even the most complex songs, and this is kind of what I was alluding to with like some of that jazz stuff, like some of that stuff like is you can boil it down to just that 1 4 5 harmony, and you don't like, I'm not trying to say you don't have to be responsible for all those chords if those are the chords, but like once the deeper you get into this, the simpler you'll realize all of that complex harmony really is, and it like boils down to 1 4 5 in a lot of ways. And then it's just like extensions of that is like this more complex harmony. Maybe some of these chord changes, right? Like there are some moves that you'll realize are very common, like a minor 6 chord, right? Like that's super common. Or maybe a song has a 2 to a dominant 2 to a 5, right? Like there are flavors that you'll find in songs that are really common, and those will also start to become categories, and you'll have things that you can do over that stuff, and you'll start to there. It's just pattern recognition. And so long way about it, I would just say yeah, this is going to work for like any song, when it comes down to it.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. One of the things you said that's true here, and part of it is, Robert, you got to go to at least the chapters in the chords here that describe the cage system and things like this to start really gaining that understanding. Because if not, this just seems too advanced, but this is coming quite quickly, right? For all of those that are finished with phase 1 here, you probably know that. And another thing, and this is where theory is especially important that Alex pointed out, is that behind complicated chord progressions is always a structure that's very simple, because again, it's typically some sort of tension release, which basically the reason why it always kind of comes back to a 1 4 5 is because 1 4 and 5 are the quintessential tonic, subdominant, and dominant chords. So they're the quintessential. The one is the huh, the subdominant is kind of like the dominant is the tension, and then there is the release. And so any other things are basically variations of that mechanism. And so, and not only this, but all tonic chords have, for those of you that don't understand this, it's okay, you will. For those of you that are a little more advanced and that have seen this stuff, it'll make sense. All the tonic chords have common tones. That's why they're all lumped into that category. All the subdominant chords have common tones. An F7 is pretty similar to a D minor 7 when you look at it under a microscope. All dominant chords also have common tones. And so when you look at like a progression like this one, you're like, I want to play this tune by my favorite player. And then you look at the chord progression and you go, oh, never mind. I guess I won't play this tune by my favorite player. And then you start breaking it down, which can only be done if you understand theory, by the way. Because if you look at this and it's Chinese to you, then you're missing the point that, well, first of all, I can get rid of all those extensions and trim this back to just triad again, if I wanted to. So I could just go, well, that's a C, that's an E, that's an A minor, that's a D minor, or that's a D major, that's a D minor, and that's a G. Now can you play this? Who in this course can play this, even if it was just open chords? Can you play this chord progression? Okay, so you can play this chord progression. You're just taking a lot of the notes away, but you're playing it. And then when you know more harmony, you realize that that chord is a passing chord going to A. That chord is a passing chord. You're back to this. And then you realize that A minor is a very subtle inversion of a C major. And so even if you wanted to go a little further, you could just play C here. And then you realize that D minor is a subtle change of an F major. And what are you back to? 1, 4, 5. Done. So we went from this to this. And it would still sound decent if you played with this in mind, even though you're playing over this chord progression. It would still sound coherent. Now, to use this simplification, to know how to go this way, you have to understand how we go this way, how chords are built up, and how we enrich a C major with some sevens, some extensions, how we can add different tension chords and things like this to make the chord progression more intricate. So understanding how to complexify things also allows you to simplify things backwards to the core kind of main mechanisms that are being used to this. Does that make sense to everyone? What do you think, Alex?
So true. So true. I remember seeing a description of that when I was younger, and like exactly what you just did, Guillaume, like with the, translating a complex chord progression to a simple one. And I remember thinking like, yeah, but that's not really how people are thinking about improvising. But like, it is literally that. Like, that is how I would approach that. And am I the greatest improviser in the world? Maybe not the greatest, but like, I would be so satisfied and be able to really express myself thinking of it like that. And then, taking some bits and pieces of more complex harmony where I want to, but like, that really it's just that. Really. It's boiling down some complex stuff to something that's actually palatable, and then adding the pieces back, for me at least, that the tensions I want to emphasize. Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. So let's see, do we have another? David, do you have any advice on practicing moving between different finger positions as you're trying to practice scales, chord tones, melody? I want to break out of the box. Also, who inspires you as a player these days? Some movements don't make sense. How do you identify the finger movements? And before you get into your answer, David, module 1, phase 2. All right, that's just what's going to happen. So, but yes, let's go for it. Alex, how would you?
I'll just give you based on that, I'll give you a brief way of how I think of it. I mean, some things are going to make more sense, right? There are some like positions, like typically if let's say I'm here, right? And I want to get up to here. Okay, well, the way that I would think of it is a slide, right? And if the slide can set you up so that you're in a place that you've been practicing, right? Like sometimes I wouldn't want to slide, sometimes a slide with a third finger might not make sense. Slides with pinkies really make sense because it sets me up for the next note, right? I guess it's about finding the places where those slides could make sense. A lot of times also in bluegrass, we do this trick. We use open strings to escape super high positions, right? So like the classic one, right? And I'm using using that open string as the opportunity. So you can do that. That's kind of like genre specific. I don't know if a lot of people, I mean, sometimes open strings are not as productive. But yeah, they're like, you kind of got to do it to figure it out. Also, just because it doesn't make as much sense on your hand doesn't mean that it's not going to produce a good effect. Like sometimes a lot of these like stretches are actually like produce the most unexpected and beautiful sounds. So just because it doesn't totally work easily doesn't mean it couldn't be a good solution to the problem of getting between spots. Those are my two pieces. What do you think? Any other stuff to
Yeah.
add there?
No, that was great. I like the fact that, a lot of the times people are like, oh, but this fingering is so hard. It's like, my answer to this is always, yeah, but is it worth it? Like, if the fingering isn't worth it, if you can find another fingering that's way easier and that produces exactly the same sound, then it's not worth it, right? But
Totally.
sometimes the stretch or whatever weird thing you're encountering is the only way to get the sound that you want. And in this case, then you got to just toughen up and practice it. That's like until you get it right. And then the other thing is for David here and for anyone that has the philosophy of breaking out of the box, remember this. And I said this again, but it's a kind of incredible when you think about it. Remember that people are gonna be like, oh, you say this all the time. Yes, I do, because it's important. How many octaves do you have in one shape? Everyone, show with your fingers. How many octaves do you have in one shape? More than 2 octaves. How many octaves do you have over the whole fretboard? 3, not 4, 3. And less with an acoustic guitar. Meaning that when you're playing in one shape, really going all over the fretboard only adds 1 octave to what you can do. So David, again, if I play my G major scale here, I've got these 2 shapes here, the open one. Let's do the pentatonic scale. Am I on here? Let me put myself on. You got this one here, right? Then you move up here, it's the same octave. You only have 1 extra note that you can get here. And then in your D shape, it's the same octave as which is the same octave as the A shape, which is the same octave as the E shape again. So this whole area of the fretboard gives you 4 shapes to play pretty much the same thing. Conclusion: if you can't play a good solo in one shape, you can't play a good solo, period. Like, a good guitarist will find ways to play a great solo leveraging just one shape, maybe sliding up to this area or this area. But it's not that you shouldn't use the whole fretboard and try to break out of the boxes. It's that sometimes you got to define the priorities. Can you make a cool solo in one shape? Can you find interesting melodic ideas, interesting rhythms? Because a lot of time guitarists think that it's their lack of amplitude on the fretboard or scales or chord tones or whatever that's making them sound not like they would want to. But in fact, it's just that they don't have any rhythmic vocabulary, and so they're always playing the same eighth notes or whatever, and it's always very predictable, and so it's not melodic in that way. Rhythm is also really crucial there. And that's another constraint that's in bluegrass that's incredible, is that bluegrass is mostly exclusively 16th notes based a lot of the time, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong here, Alex, but there is of course lower than 16th notes, but there's a lot of 16th notes run. And so there's this flow where all you have to really make the solo, because there's that constraint, cool, is how you're flowing around the fretboard and your melodic ideas and things like this, which is another cool constraint to explore. But again, before you decide that you need to break out of the box, ask yourself, is that really what's preventing me from making cool solos? And also, do I really know my boxes that well? Just each of them individually? Do I know where the chord tones are, how to grab the different arpeggios and things like that? So try to go in that direction. And then once you get to that point, you can be like, no, I definitely need to break out of the box. And then that's what Alex talked about here. I call it cross shape exercises, right? Where you start in one shape and you slide up to another one and you try to move kind of, or even sometimes horizontally, and then try to find where you're at when you slide up like this, and then that's going to help you break out of this. Does that make sense, David? And
I
everyone else,
just
by the way?
just want to add also, I think that's great, Guillaume, and also like about the bluegrass stuff. First of all, actually, bluegrass, it's not sixteenths. I think all of bluegrass is eighth notes. It's
Oh,
cut time.
okay. Oh, yeah,
It's
because
cut
it's
time.
twice as fast. That's right.
That's yeah, that's how there's a big discussion about that in the bluegrass world. It's very contentious, but I think of those as eighth notes. Um, but yeah, like the best bluegrass improvisers um, are the ones who just take the melody and create like on their break or their when they're improvising, and just have this like unbelievable rhythmic reinterpretation. Like all the flashy stuff like yeah, like it's okay, it's cool, it's flashy, but like if you can just use rhythm just in one spot, like that's the sauce, that is the stuff that's gonna like that's the best. And then the only other thing like on the more technical side that I also just thought of just based on kind of what you're saying and is I would also say I do like the whole like three notes per string kind of thing. I don't know if that's something you go into.
Yeah.
um, Not like I don't think there's any one system personally for like looking at a scale up and down the neck that is like the best. I think they're just all good to hold up to one another because it's in comparison to me that I learn the most about what my where my blind spots are and entertaining some three notes per string, right? You take three notes per string. It's descriptive, right? So it starts to break down some of the boxes and it can give you some novel ideas about where there are some stretches that break the boundaries of the boxes. So again, maybe you don't go over three notes per string, but like just finding as many ways to compare different ways of visioning the fretboard is great,
Yeah.
and that's going to help you.
Yeah, we do go into it. It's so funny. I'm like, did you take my course?
I
uh,
didn't.
no, yeah, phase last module of phase two, when we go into the major scale, I talk about the three note per string, and I specifically, exactly like Alex says, say that it's a different vision that can be very useful, especially to cross shapes, because fatally, when you do three note per string, you have to move between two shapes, and so it's another kind of system that allows you to see shapes as more of like two shapes, because when you do this, you're fatally going between like a G shape here, ending on the D shape over here. So you've got this built-in cross shape system when you do it like this. And the whole point is like Alex said, it's they're maps. They're not the territory. The territory is just a bunch of notes. You're trying to make sense of it. Three note per string, cage system, they're all just different maps. And honestly, the best thing, if you're trying to navigate as precisely as possible a city or whatever, is to have different set of maps active at the same time, because they're going to give you different pieces of information, different way to think of the fretboard. And so when you're going up to your D shape, three note per string run, they're great for fast runs because you really don't have to think about it. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. You can use hammer-ons. It's super cool. And then when you get there, though, you have to think, okay, where am I now? Oh, I'm in this shape. This is where my chord tones are. And so that's like where you're gonna switch maps again. But that's awesome. Oh, can you, Alex? How important would you say that alternate picking is as a bluegrass musician?
That's it. That is the sauce. It's all alternate picked. I mean, I'll break the rule, but really, like when it comes to that eighth note flow, that is engaged with my right hand, and that it's like this. It's almost like an external device I use to try to make sure I'm not breaking that flow. Is just that alternate picked thing. Even like in bluegrass, even when you do a pull off, you don't break the flow, right? It's not just the next note is, oh, the whatever you left off on. You like you can ghost those notes with your right hand to make sure you don't lose that flow. So it's crucial. Also, just like I think we've said a bunch of times on this call, like rules, the container exists so that then you can also break the rules. So of course there are exceptions, but you have to know the rule to be able to break the rule. So like alternate picking is so crucial to bluegrass, and people break the rule.
Yeah.
But it poses a conundrum, because if that's your propulsion, if your right hand is your propulsion, and you get off the track for a second, you have to find a creative way to get back on the track.
Yeah, that's
Also, I'll say I've been playing some electric recently, which is something I haven't really been doing much of. And my bluegrass alternate chops have been like, I have had no technique, no care for electric technique before. It is like improved my electric technique like crazy. It's nuts. I'm like, oh my God, I can articulate all this stuff. So I love
oh,
alternate. Yeah.
that's yeah. I mean, that's why I teach it again as a foundation. It's like there is most things in guitar when you think about it, whether from alternate picking just for soloing or for proper rhythmic playing when you're doing like funky stuff, like the motoring of a rhythm that's done with just down ups, down ups, down ups that are following a specific time division is the absolute best way to build your sense of time and to master kind of the different accentuations that you can put going up and going down. So that then, of course, once you get good enough at this, you can start introducing other things. But you'll notice, like Alex said, that a lot of the time when you're playing, when I do this, I'm not going, I'm going, sorry, my guitar was off here, but like this. Right? So that I've got these rhythms on the right part of my motion so that I don't have to think about my right hand. My right hand is the timekeeper in some sense, and that allows me to, focus on what I want to do over here. So yeah, yay to alternate picking. And I mean, that was an easy one here because you're, bluegrass musicians definitely like the flat picking is kind of part of the style there. So yeah, awesome. Okay, Aaron had to go, but that's okay. And then yeah, do you have any last questions? By the way, if you have a last question, feel free to unmute yourself, ask it orally. You can just say hi, if you want, or give Alex some.
Alex, thank you very much. Awesome job. Are you drinking coffee there out of a mason jar?
Yeah, I try to go through one of these whole things a day.
You are the real deal, my friend. I am so fortunate to have had this opportunity to meet you or see you and have this, and you're drinking coffee out of a mason jar. What more could I ask for?
There you go. Cheers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, where in Hudson Valley are you from? I'm in Hudson Valley right now.
No way. I grew up in Rosendale, Stone Ridge, in between those two spots.
I'm in Saratoga, New York. Saratoga.
Okay, it's a little bit north of me, but
Yep.
Yep, beautiful, beautiful.
Did you ever fish the striper run?
I didn't. No, I haven't.
Oh, dude, those are some big fish.
He was
Next
practicing guitar.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Any other question? Who's got something to say here?
Hey, Alex, and again, thanks to Will for bringing Alex into this awesome group. I love your blending of genres of like jazz and bluegrass. I can't even remember which came first for me. I started with blues, and then like many years I've been curious about jazz, so I kind of dabbled in. Well, I dabbled in bluegrass because I was scared of jazz, but I love bluegrass, and I delved in jazz. And I'm curious, like, who are the folks that kind of inspired you moving out of jazz and into bluegrass, and who really inspires you today as a player?
Absolutely. Yeah, I forgot to answer that. Sorry about that. It's
Yeah.
David, right? Is it David?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, well, okay, so the reason I got into bluegrass was, unabashedly Billy Strings. He's got his own thing, but the players that really got me hooked coming from that jazz background were absolutely Tony Rice. If you listen, my favorite album of his is it's a weird choice. It's Backwaters, which is like an acoustic jazz record, really incredible. Two other players who really inspire me. One would be David Greer. If you haven't checked him out, just unbelievable. I don't even understand how like his playing is possible. I'm trying to emulate him a lot. He has his own lens into jazz, which is very unique, and it also captures a lot of what's so crucial to flat picking as a technique. Grier. There are a couple of records that he did with Todd Phillips and Matt Flinner, bass player. It's an acoustic trio. So the records are under the name Greer, Phillips, and Flinner, or some combination of those three. Two records that they put out, unbelievable. Have some jazz stuff on there, but it's all like acoustic bluegrass trio is underlying. And then also somebody who you should really check out, a New Yorker. I took a lesson with him actually last time I was in New York. Grant Gordy, a younger flat picker who is he's on the cutting edge. Grant is a huge inspiration. There are a lot of newer bluegrass players who have this really incredible jazz sensibility. This guy also, I could list for days, but really a nonconformist. Stash Slouch. If you're really interested in some pretty like out there bluegrass guitar playing, you should check out Stash. He is bizarre, but he's like a cross between Bill Monroe, like classic bluegrass, and like I don't know if you're familiar with like Anthony Braxton, like the avant-garde improviser. He's like splits the difference between them, and he's an inspiration. I could never play like him, but his stuff is unbelievable. So those are some folks, and then I'm always influenced by my biggest jazz folks who always influence me are Thelonious Monk, Charlie Parker, John Coltrane. Those folks are constantly in my head. But yeah.
Thanks.
Some
Thanks,
folks
Can you
Alex.
in you
can
too.
you repeat the I got Anthony Braxton, but there was like who was the guy that's in the middle and who was the third triangle of that?
Okay, so Stash Slouch is the modern player, and then he's
Ash Weiss.
influenced. Yeah, Stash Slouch. You should check him out. He's bizarre, incredible. And on one end is Anthony Braxton, who's a saxophonist, improvised music as a genre, avant-garde jazz. And on the other side of Stash is Bill Monroe, who's the father of
Bill
bluegrass,
Monroe.
very traditional,
Okay.
the founder of bluegrass, and he's smack in the middle. It's fun stuff.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Heck yeah, yeah,
Sweet.
yeah.
All right, I'll take a last question here for remark. Lee, yeah, go for it. Unmute yourself. You're muted. Hey Lee, you're muted, so you gotta unmute yourself.
I didn't have a question. I was writing down the artist, but I can come up with something. I guess how do you like decide? So when you're like thinking in your shapes and improvising, do you have like? I know this is hard to like really nail down approach, but maybe when you were learning your shapes and stuff, did you have any that you kind of like were like, okay, this is the one that like maybe I'm really comfortable with that I want to like sit in for a while and work out melodies through, or how do you kind of approach that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, especially in bluegrass, there are places that are or shapes that get a little bit neglected. Um, I mean, like G shape is like very common. C shape is very common, and D shape are very common. And um, just being honest with myself about like I'm really not giving this A shape as much time as I should. I think that's a natural inclination to find like a pet shape that you feel really confident in, and that's fine, and that's good. It's good to feel confident in a certain shape, but just being honest and aware about what your blind spots are, would be my piece of advice.
Lee, I see you're unmuted.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, I just wanted to mention, because I knew that many years ago I got to see Doc and Merle play about a dozen times when I lived in Los Angeles, and I thought he was the ultimate ambassador for American music, and it's just stuck with me.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, Lee's talking about Doc and Merle Watson. Doc Watson, the father of Merle, and bluegrass, yes, but so much more than just bluegrass. I mean, responsible for inspiring so many people. I mean, I guess like that Nitty Gritty Dirt Band record kind of also kicked it off, and Doc's notoriety and recognition. But yeah, Doc Watson, I mean, he is just the perfect example of, yeah, truly American music and the melting pot of that. And also would encourage folks to check out Doc. Incredible flat picker. Unique technique also. Very interesting right hand technique. Thanks, Lee. Nice to say hi to you.
I see you.
Yeah, awesome. All right, we'll do one more. 42. We'll give in one more. Come on. No, you guys got it all figured out. You're good. All right. Cool. All right. Well, I think once again, thanks a lot, Alex. If you want to, by the way, everyone will jump off the call here, but if you want to stay on for a few seconds and chat for a second, Alex, let's do that. And then yeah, thanks everyone for taking time out of your day, or sometimes even night, for those of you that are in Europe. And there will be more of those to come. I'm going to try to have at least one per month, as depending on the availability of the guitarists. So again, just trying to find ways to make this process of the academy even more enjoyable and more motivating, because it's always good to have someone else come in and show you how they think, to further encourage you and really kind of like following the path and this all the progression and all those steps. So hopefully that is helping and you're enjoying this.
Yeah, this is Robert. I just want to say that this was extremely valuable for me. And, I can see how it's really going to help me learn this fretboard the way I want to learn it. So thank you very much, both of you.
Yeah, and this is Paul.
Yep. Who is it? Where? I lost you. Paul, I lost you.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you.
If you could get, you know what, I want to check out every single person that he mentioned. If you could get him to send you that and post it on your website, I'd totally be stoked. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's we'll talk about this, Alex, in a second. David said, thank you, Alex. Definitely going to need the replays to absorb it. Yeah, by the way, everyone, the replay will be uploaded. You can watch this as much as you want. And yeah, that being said, I'm going to wish everyone a great rest of your day, morning, evening, and I will see you on the next Academy call.